So when I was 10 years old, my family and me lived in Colombia, South America. Colombia is where the South American mountain range, the Andes, begins. And my dad, being the nature lover that he is, started taking my brother and me to hike these mountains. Today I'm going to tell you about a particular hike, one that took us to La Laguna de Arcoiris, or in English, the Rainbow Lagoon. So on the day of the hike, we got dressed, got ready, and then drove to the meeting point, where we met the rest of the hikers for the very first time. After that, we got in a big bus and drove for about an hour and a half along winding roads until we arrived at the town of Macheta. Macheta is located in the valley under the lagoon. To get to the lagoon, we would have to climb an altitude of 1,000 meters and cover a distance of about 12 kilometers. So we started the hike, and after about 2 hours, we arrived at a clearing that was horizontally against the mountain, but only about 6 meters wide, where it was enclosed by some sort of long grass. The ground was a dark, wet shade of brown, mud. But we had the mountain on one side and the impenetrable grass on the other, so there was only one way to get past this mud, and that was by going through it. I was very reluctant at first. Of course, I didn't want to go cannonballing into the mud. But after a while, I realized that it was the only way. So I lifted my boot to take a step into the mud, and just as soon as it touched the surface, I could feel it get pulled in. The mud felt like quicksand, pulling my leg in deeper and deeper. I desperately tried to pull my boot out, but it was just in too deep, and the mud around it was too thick. I started to panic, calling for my dad. All of a sudden, tears started dripping down my face. I had known I was going to hate this trip to the Rainbow Lagoon. I could have been sleeping in my bed or watching TV on the couch, but instead I was there, wrestling with the mud that kept firmly gripping my boot, not letting me escape. In all the panic, I didn't realize that my dad was calling to me, trying to calm me down. I broke free of this state of frustration to hear what he was trying to tell me, to use my hands. Of course, in my irritation with the whole day, I hadn't even considered to think of a solution. And so I tried it. I dug my hands into the mud and tried to feel for my boot. When I finally felt it, the rubber was slick and hard to get a grip on. But luckily, it had 2 little handles at the top, and so I slid my fingers through the handles and closed my knuckles tightly, and pulled. I pulled and pulled and pulled with all my might until finally the boot came unstuck. But by then, I was exhausted and did not want to keep going any longer. I told my dad this, but instead he only told me to take a look at the valley and of Macheta far below us. He told me that even if our bodies were aching and our boots were covered in mud, we were still standing there, taking in that beautiful view. On a related note, he told me about a quote from an Aerosmith song called Amazing. You all probably know it. The quote is, "Life's a journey, not a destination." And it says to take each day, each challenge, one by one, and to appreciate the journey that is taken towards that destination. I realized then that I could have been doing that since the very beginning of the hike. If I could have appreciated the challenge of pulling my boots through the mud, I maybe would have found the once laborious task an adventure. One thing's for sure, I definitely would have stopped to take in all that we had accomplished much sooner. Looking back at the view of the valley and of the big chunk of mountain we had climbed, I knew I couldn't turn back now. I had to remember the reason I had come there in the first place. Because my dad had made me to, yes, but also because I wanted to see the lagoon. It was like the treasure at the end of the map. And even though it seemed hard to reach in the beginning, we had all worked hard to get there, and now we were close. So coming out of this stretch of mud, I had a new mindset. I would no longer look for the bad, but be grateful for the good. So we had about 1 more hour of hiking until we reached the top of the lagoon. the top of the mountain. I looked up to the sky and saw that dark clouds were closing in on us. Rain was sure to be coming. But even with that, we had to keep going. As we arrived to the top, I could sort of make out the shape of the lagoon from afar. But just as we got close enough to really see it, it got surrounded in a mix of rain clouds and fog. I hadn't seen the slightest flicker of this long sought-after lagoon. Only my brother, who was hiking with the leaders of the group, got to see a glimpse of it. I was devastated. I felt like I had failed my sole mission on this hike to see the lagoon. I felt like I had overcome all the obstacles, but now, once I had gotten to my goal, I couldn't really achieve it. But there was nothing I could do. So I ate my mushy peanut butter and jelly sandwich under a big rock to shelter from the rain. The jelly was now spilling over the edges of the bread and soaking the napkin. I hated it when that happened. But there was nothing to see, no lagoon to marvel at, so I finished my mushy sandwich and we started our way back down the mountain. It wasn't until about 2 hours into the hike back down that I remembered the mindset that I had had coming out of the stretch of mud. And I realized that it was in that exact situation that the mindset could help me the most. That the best thing I could do then was try to learn from my mistakes and appreciate those challenges. Most importantly, I thought about how gratitude could help me overcome this frustration. I thought about how often appreciating and being grateful for the challenges tends to take away their difficulty. At least the level of difficulty that we perceive these obstacles have in our minds. The challenges could become less of a burden and more of an opportunity to enhance both ourselves and our character. Finally, whether the ultimate goal is achieved or not, being grateful for those obstacles will ensure you make the best of the journey. Thank you.